Bear with. Thank you. Okay, morning again, everybody. So thanks so much for joining today's Lunch and Learn session. Before we get going, just a quick bit of housekeeping in terms of the recording today. So as mentioned previously, the session will be recorded and will be made available on the Working in Mortgages website via the Lunch and Learn area on there. So if for any reason you don't want to be recorded, please do leave the call now and watch it back when we make the recording available. But we'd hope you are delighted to stay with us today. Also, you are welcome to have your cameras on or off. It's entirely up to you. But just happy you're able to join us today. So thank you for that. Today's session is going to be hosted by Will Lloyd-Hayward from the Brightstar group, who I will hand over to in just a second. But today's session is talking all about the role of Pride in Finance Alliance and the role they're looking to play in the wider mortgage industry. And today's session is going to reflect on some of the progress that we've made across our sector and the society, and also examine the challenges that the members of the LGBTQ+ community continue to face, including looking at how we can support with allyship, both for individuals, teams and organisations. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Will to host the call. Over to you, Will.
Thank you, and thank everyone for being here today. I'm delighted to be joined by Iain Cartlidge, Client Director of AE3 Media and founder of DIFF, Rachel Eason-Whale, Head of Impact and Inclusion at L&C Mortgages, and Amy Loddington, Communications Director for Barcadia Media and the Financial Reporter at Women's Recognitions Awards. Pride for me is an incredibly personal thing, hence why we established the Pride in Finance Alliance. And for me, as I reflect on Pride right now, I wanted to take the opportunity to just share a little brief scene set for where we find ourselves and where Pride has been. It was the 1st of July 1972 that the first UK Gay Pride rally took place in London, with around 2,000 people marching from Trafalgar Square to Hyde Park. To put that into the context, at the time, homosexuality had been partially discriminated in England and Wales only 5 years before that. And even then, it only applied to men over the age of 21. Equality back then was still a distant dream for many people in our community, but the 2,000 people marched anyway. Throughout the 70s and into the 80s, Pride in this country grew, but it faced one of its darkest chapters with the AIDS crisis that tore through the LGBT community. And rather than receiving compassion, many in the community faced stigma, abandonment, and government interference that in part still continues in elements today. Pride marches during this era became something really profound to be part of. Part celebration, part grief, but part furious demand to be seen and to be heard. Then in the late 80s came Section 28, introduced by the Thatcher government, a law that prohibited local councils and schools from promoting homosexuality. And this is really relevant for me when I think about where we are in 2026. For a generation of LGBT young people in Britain, it meant growing up without role models, without acknowledgement, without anyone at school being able to legally and able to say, you are valid, you're not alone, we are here for you. That was repealed in 2003, but its impact on an entire generation cannot be overstated, and it still impacts people today. But through all of this, Pride endured, it grew, and it has fought back. Throughout the 90s and the 2000s, brought extraordinary progress. Civil partnerships were introduced in 2004, and in 2014, equal marriage became law in England, Wales, and Scotland. It was a landmark moment, and one that can be seen unthinkable to those 2,000 people that marched in 1972. Today, Pride in London alone is one of the largest Pride events in the world, drawing over 1.5 million people. So, if so much has changed, if we have equal marriage and these legal protections, why is Pride still relevant today? And why is Pride in Finance and this initiative and so much more that our industry doing so relevant? Because quite simply, rights on paper do not always mean safety in reality. Hate crimes targeting LGBT people in the UK have risen significantly in the recent years. LGBT young people are still disproportionately likely to experience mental health issues, family rejection and homelessness. And beyond our own borders, in over 60 countries around the world, same-sex relationships are still criminalised and in some punishable by death. Progress has been made, but progress never stops. Well, a million people march through London every June. They are not just celebrating what has been won, but the message of solidarity about what still has to be done. And that's why I'm delighted to be joined by my three panelists today as we talk about what our industry has done, where we are today, and what more we can do about building the biggest allyship to support LGBT people across our community. So, kicking off, I'll start with Rachel, L&C Mortgages. Thank you, Rachel, for this afternoon and your time. I guess straight over to you in terms of the incredible work that you do personally, but also as part of L&C. What are you doing to support colleagues? Why are you invested in being an ally and supporting Pride and maybe shared experiences that you've had?
Sure. So I'll start off talking about supporting colleagues at L&C. So the first thing that we did, which was a major thing, and it wasn't just for Pride, it was quite a lot of the awareness days, was just moving from it being just within that month. We want to talk about it at all times of the year. It doesn't just have to be a rainbow month. There's a lot of the rainbow logos, as a lot of us see, that pop up on a lot of organisations just over the period. Our ERGs, so our employee resource groups, have been a massive support for this. Our We Belong group is sponsored from the top down, with our CEO taking sponsorship leadership within that group. But we've also then got working groups below that. So we've got Pride Not Prejudice, which is our LGBTQ group. We have got head office in Bath, so that's where the name came from on that one, linking with that. It's all about visibility, about the awareness, but also thinking about the meaningful support that we can create. And those voices come from those who are working every day within. It's no point coming from the top down who aren't seeing that on the, working the everyday roles across advice, operations and things. It's actually getting their voices involved. A massive thing for us has been storytelling, and I go on about storytelling quite a lot, but I think it's really important because, especially more in a remote hybrid world now, we don't have as many conversations, we don't get to know as many people, but also sometimes we don't see the people who, the representation, people like me. And stories have been really powerful. And I think by sharing stories about lots of different areas, we've started to see that psychological safety, where people see that if I share my story, I am in a safe space and people actually are, cheering me on, supporting me, understanding my circumstances. So storytelling has been a massive thing for us, not just directly about LGBTQ. We've done a lot of awareness and education, but also intersectionality. So colleagues who may have that with mental health, may have it with neurodiversity. So exploring that route as well. And we've also invited external contributions. So very recently, Leslie from Barclays shared for about her experiences. And so it's actually nice to see people within the industry and other jobs that they may be aspiring to go to, sharing their stories too. We often review our policies, and policies, I'm very about people over policy, but the policy is important, and using lived experience to shape those policies. So listening to your people, kind of understanding what they're looking to get out of it, how it's going to work. I think the how is very important because, for example, we've just reviewed our transitioning policy, and actually people want to be able to go into that and know, how does it work? What if I was to, come out of work? What does this look like? So making as much of that in there as possible is really, really key. And I think the stories as well should also be about the tough times, not just the positive times. We've had some stories where people have shared about their safety, about their mental health, to really understand the challenges that they're going through. So I think that's also important. Amy, my colleague who was meant to be here today, unfortunately can't be, but she did share with me that with the policies being very inclusive to all, a really good example for her was when her and her partner were looking to look at adoption. What she's had to do with a lot of other organisations and stuff is, this is my situation, and explain all of her circumstances to get additional information, whereas she could just go into our policies and understand without having to ask extra questions about, if she was to adopt, what her circumstances would be. And I think that's really important. We also have inclusive events. That's really important because of things that are going on around the world. So we have things like the challenges with which toilet can I use. We make it as open as possible right from the beginning, so everyone's aware of that. And it was really a touching moment for me was when our CEO was walking around with a massive flag on his back at one of our events saying everyone is welcome here. It just made it feel like, you know, this is that safe space we want for everyone. Talking about safety, I think I've seen the difference it makes when someone feels safe on who they are. Belonging's not just one big action. It's built in all those little moments that we build up. In my own life, I know what it feels like to be to have understanding. I'm a carer. I've navigated life, you know, difficult life moments, but it just makes me more passionate to create that safe space for everyone. And then talking about allyship, I think inclusion should never just depend on the people who are most affected to have to speak up. I think we rely that they are the only ones that can speak up, and if they don't, then it kind of gets paved over. So I think for me, I think I can help educate others or challenge that unfairness, use my voice, the influence, or even my privilege to make things better, or at least the same for everyone. But it's also not being perfect. I think that's really, really important, because I think that's an area a lot of people worry about. I'm willing to learn. I get things wrong, and that's okay. We just need to be brave to act, but we also need to be consistent. So when times are challenging, when things are uncomfortable, consistency is really key. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I think it really resonates, because part of the biggest thing about Pride and Finance, but anything that I try and talk about, is when I came into the industry, finding role models that were like me. You know, I'm very happily a proud gay man.
No.
There's never always been that scenario, and being able to move the dial on any measure. It takes the people that are there now. It takes the likes of you. It takes other organisations to be the allies to support people and to lift us up when we need to. So, look, thank you for that, and for what L&C are doing. Iain, I want to pick up with you now. I mean, what AE3 Media has done through launching DIFF a number of years ago, and in the same respect for Barcadia with the Women's Recognition Award, it's not been a quick project and off you've gone. You've actually tried to drive real change and been consistent. So, you know, from your perspective, DIFF, why was DIFF so important at the time it was launched? Why is it still important, and how has it lent in on pride issues and the LGBT to drive forward that progress? And then again, I guess personally from your perspective, why is allyship so important for you and what you're doing?
Perfect. Thank you, Will, and thank you for the invitation to be involved. Yeah, I'll start with DIFF, and I'm pleased to sort of see several members on the call today. Ultimately, yeah, what is it? It's a series of events and podcasts that we deliver during the year through Mortgage Solutions that, you know, hopefully creates an environment that enables people to feel supported. I mean, Rachel's already said it. You know, really, you know, and it's wider than just the LGBTQ community, but within that we've had specific focus on it. You know, so it sort of ensures that anybody, you know, regardless of race, ethnicity, you know, gender, sexual orientation, or ability or disability, feels welcome. I guess for those people who perhaps don't know about DIFF, I'll just sort of touch on, I guess, what our guiding principles are before then sort of just touching on, you know, specifically the LGBTQ community, because I think it's really important, and it's, you know, fairly logical, to be honest. But, you know, the first principle that sort of underpins the direction of travel for all of the activities we do is the categoric proof that inclusion is good for business, right? I know most people on this call will know that, you know, DIFF isn't just a crusade that we're trying to make ourselves feel better or tick a box that confirms that we're doing the right thing. Actually, it's absolutely proven, and I think there's a variety of studies that suggest, to the tune of about 20% more profitable, for businesses that are more inclusive and supportive. And of course, that comes from broader thinking. It comes from diversity of attitude, different views and creativity, and that's ultimately what we're trying to encourage, to make sure that everybody feels as though they can have a voice. The second part to that is attracting new talent. Again, it's not a new concept, but it's a challenge that I know people will be familiar with. But ultimately, we do need to increase the base in which we're inspiring people from different groups to get involved in this market. We know how great it is, but DIFF was put together to make sure that people realised what the opportunity is within this market, but also critically, when they're in the market, there is a route to the very top, and there are opportunities for everybody, including people from different communities. The third sort of principle is being authentic and bringing your true self to work, which I know can be a challenge, but ultimately we want everybody to respect themselves. We want people to respect each other, and have that support framework in place that enables people to embrace diversity and difference, because it is so important and critical. And lastly, and it's just been mentioned, role models, trailblazers. I think they are really important, an important mechanism to inspire change. And hopefully we'll get time where I can perhaps ask you your view on that later in the session. But hopefully giving trailblazers the platform to be more visible, to inspire more participants, irrespective of their background, so that people from all minority groups can get the recognition they deserve. So within that framework, I guess, we've delivered, as you've already mentioned, several podcasts, several events specifically focused on the LGBTQ community. And ultimately, Rachel's just mentioned it, it's about understanding, it's about getting a first-hand experience of somebody else's lived experience and the challenges faced by one of these sort of communities. So within LGBTQ, we've covered everything from attitudes towards homosexuality within financial services. We've covered the experience of being openly gay in the mortgage industry, the importance of year-round support. Obviously, we're in Pride Month at the moment, but we've covered things like pinkwashing, rainbow capitalism, and how people potentially, jump on the bandwagon and use, Pride, for example, for marketing purposes. We've also covered the emotional impact on repeatedly having to come out, if I call it that, in a professional setting, which I'm sure is phenomenally draining and unfair. So DIFF really is, it's all about education, it's about understanding, it's about getting clearer views on those lived experiences if you don't have them already, and it's, in this context, listening and learning about LGBTQ experiences, so that you're not always expecting other people to educate you, which I think is not the right way around about going about it. I think the other thing worth mentioning that we have been involved in, and it is sort of an industry-wide initiative, is around events. Amy's on the call today. She's part of the initiative that we have with working in mortgages at the moment. But from an event perspective, obviously we've been working hard on inclusivity and in particular event behaviour. Now perhaps some people associate event behaviour perhaps more with the gender dynamic, perhaps misogynistic behaviour, physical inappropriateness in that kind of dynamic. But actually, what we're trying to remind delegates and guests at events is that it's far wider reaching than that. And in the context of this conversation, I think what is incredibly important is language, and how people are considering language and using language at events, so that we're encouraging people to think about what they're saying, become a bit more educated about, what other communities feel and have to go through. And when potentially there is a largely invisible difference, which potentially is the case in this situation, that language clearly can either help people feel really included or make them feel super excluded pretty instantaneously, and that, whether there's no harm intended or not. So therefore encouraging that sort of thought around language is incredibly important. We've encouraged gender neutral terms where appropriate, respecting pronouns. I think it's important that everybody at events in its entirety are prepared to challenge, for example, inappropriate jokes or stereotypes or exclusionary behaviour, and showing that visible support, as Rachel's already mentioned, just by demonstrating that, you are, a safe and supportive colleague or ally. So that's super important, and that has now extended with working more GIS with the help of people like Amy at Barcadia Media, where we're extending that behaviour into thinking about how we can be even more exclusive at events and networking opportunities. So that's about getting more different voices involved in more events. So it's not necessarily exclusively about the LGBTQ community, but obviously inclusivity for all. But it's hopefully a way of encouraging further participation. So as I say, more voices at things like conferences, people on panels or delivering presentations. We're all a bit guilty of the same people being on those same panels and delivering the same presentations and being visible at the same events. So it's an opportunity for the whole market to give a wider group of people the opportunity, and that comes from allowing people to know that opportunity exists, but also from a leadership perspective, making sure that the right culture exists within businesses to allow more people to be in attendance, to put people forward as part of their early learning within their careers, to allow everybody to have the same opportunity ultimately. And as I say, this isn't a competitive advantage for AE3. This is an industry initiative, that hopefully will be pushing through over the next weeks and months. So watch this space for that. I think you mentioned allyship as well, Will. I think I sort of follow Rachel's lead really in this, that I guess at a personal level, if I think about it from that perspective, we all want to feel accepted, and we would always love to have somebody fighting our corner for us, if we needed it, and that's whether we're in a room or not in a room. So my involvement with DIFF particularly, I'm very lucky that I also work with some amazing people at AE3 Media that's given me the opportunity to understand people's lived experiences, just difference, and a sense of people's challenges, the obstacles, the prejudice that sadly still exists in society, and with that comes the real possibility of impact on somebody's career, which is through no fault of their own, and they can be subjected to that prejudice. So I feel very privileged, using Rachel's term, that I am in a position to positively affect that, and I actively embrace that sort of challenge, if that's the right phrase, to help support and champion people who would benefit from it. And I think it's incredibly important to do so. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Iain. I really appreciate that. We're going to move over now in terms of the Pride and Finance Alliance, and actually, as one of the leads on that with Amy, I'll step back and let Rachel and Iain ask us a couple of questions on that one. Fair. So yeah, Rachel, do you want to kick off on that?
Mute button not working, always one, isn't there? Amy, I was just hoping you could talk to us a little bit about what the Finance Alliance is and what they're looking to do. Oh, I think you're on mute too.
Best laid plans. Been on mute for 20 minutes and then it's my time to shine and I can't get the mute button undone. Yeah, well, thank you, Rachel. And firstly, just want to say a big thank you to Will, because it was Will that brought the idea and said, look, this is something that I want to do. Would you like to be involved in it? And we were keen as a business, and I was also personally very keen to be involved in something that's important to me. Broadly, when I look at sort of the background of what's been going on in the industry in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, and there's been lots of groups looking at the people sort of behind the businesses, so things like DIFF, like the Women in Finance Charter, like the Mental Health Charter, like GAIN. There's lots of groups looking at sort of who are the people in our industry, how do we support them, regardless of who they are. And so, you know, when Will came to us with this conversation, it was just, you know, it was an obvious yes, of course, this is something we should be doing. There should be a specific group for the LGBTQ community. And so that was sort of the driving force behind it. But what I think is interesting is that some of the conversations that Will and Andy and I had beforehand were sort of borne out in the results of our first Pride in Finance Alliance surveys. We did a big industry study last year with hundreds of people took part, and we got perspectives from everyone across the industry. So people who work in management, people who are advisors, people who just sort of work in the businesses in the industry, about their lived experience either as an LGBTQ person themselves, or working with people in their business, or working as a manager, working as an advisor with LGBTQ clients, and sort of getting their perspectives, getting their stories on it. And the things that we found really drove, sort of called back to why this was important. I think Will mentioned before about, you know, we've got marriage equality now, we've got legal protection, so, you know, what's the problem? And actually all of the things that are the problems, particularly in the workplace, are so much more subtle, or very often very subtle and much more hidden than that. So we, you know, things like 38% of the people who replied to our survey who identified as LGBTQ said that they experienced sort of like subtle or hidden microaggressions at work, and 33% of them said that they've been discriminated against. Those things are very often much more hidden and much harder to prove, much harder to talk about. So one of the big driving forces behind the Pride and Finance Alliance was bring those things into the light, because I think you said, Rachel, about storytelling. I think that's really important to tell those stories, to tell them openly, and to have those conversations in a way that is more visible, so that people looking for role models, people looking for solidarity, people looking for understanding of their own experiences can see those conversations being had very openly. And I think Will's point about Section 28 is one that I hadn't really thought about. But, you know, most of the people on this call will still have been at school while those things were in place. Those conversations were not being had, those stories were not being told, even in a sort of casual day-to-day way. And I think that's just as important in the workplace as it is when you're younger. And I think, so yeah, it was about bringing those things to light and bringing them out a bit more publicly.
Can I extend that sort of conversation around role models and allies, I guess, to you, Will? Why are they so important to you?
I think for me, and I briefly touched on it when I came into the industry, it's really easy, and it remains easy to find female role models. It remains easy to find role models from the BAME community, because there are natural physical differentiations that make you know that. But when I came in at 21, 22, I didn't necessarily have that. I was going through my own understanding in my personal life. So being able to know where can I reach out, who was there that was like me, and I came from a very fortunate position, unfortunately, where my business was great and was an arm around my shoulder consistently. But there are people in large firms and small firms who don't necessarily have that have that reach and that arm of support. And as ever, if we go back to 2016, when the government at the time launched Women in Finance and all the big drives that happened, if we're going to see any progress and any dial change, to coin the phrase about the white middle-aged man being the dominant force in most industries, well, unless we bring allies with us, unless we broaden our education, unless we broaden our understanding, unless we're more open to discussions, we need to move the population with us, and it takes individuals like yourself to help drive that change. And then from the role model perspective, I look at someone like Leslie, and I look at so many other individuals who I am just so proud to be able to talk to about my experiences and share adoption journeys, or being at an awards event, as you mentioned, and someone asked me, how's my wife? How long we've been married? And I have the uncomfortable, I don't have a wife, I've got a husband, I've been married 5 years. So be able to have more broad and open conversations, because you know you have role models but allies around you that will have your back, gives you a significant step up in confidence. And I think that's what it is, because you know you're out at times and it feels like a battle, but you know you've got a great army of friends and colleagues and peers behind you if it ever got a bit too tough. And I think that's, for me, why it's so important.
So off the back of that, I obviously shared, I love storytelling. I'd like to know why pride's so important to you.
I think the history, when I love New York as a city, and when you read about Stonewall and the inspiration that had to just one night in 1968, just spark the revolution of change, that when we're gonna be stand up and we're gonna be seen. And I've gone through all sorts of views in my time. And you mentioned it, Rachel, about the logo changes, and I keep on going back and forward with. I did a podcast with Barrett at DIFF about, I don't know, I was against it, and then I've been convinced that the small individual changes, and if people want to do that and to showcase, then it's all baby steps, it's all tiny steps. So I think pride for me is so important, because it is that opportunity, it is that moment for us to celebrate, the strength in difference. It gives people that time to coalesce. It's not about saying that we need or we shouldn't have, a straight person's month, and the idea that we shouldn't have Black History Month, we should have White History Month, and all these to and fro you get from people. I'm happy to celebrate everyone. I'm happy for everyone to have a day to celebrate whatever we have every day of the year. It's a moment to coalesce. It's a moment to see the progress we've made, and then reflect on what we need to do differently. And that can happen across every corner, whether that's International Women's Day, International Men's Day, Black History Month, Remembrance Day, all these things are that moment to just say, where are we and where do we still need to go? And for me, that's why pride remains so important. Where are we and what does the future look like, and where do we still need to step in? Because we're making progress, but progress comes when we all keep going in the same direction for it. And if you let up, it can retreat. And I think for me, that's actually the women in finance agenda, and actually probably a moment to bring Amy back in terms of what you've done as an organisation and with the awards. It's championed something, and again I mentioned about Iain. It's not given up. You've stayed consistent with it, and it's kept the dial moving. So what do you think that has led to pushing the dial so much and keeping it on the agenda? And I guess where's that side of it going in terms of the equality and the diversity side for that awards sort of this year and beyond, really?
Yeah, so obviously when we launched the Women's Recognition Awards, clue is in the name, it was very much about women and gender equality. And one of my favourite stories to tell is that primarily the response was absolutely phenomenal, but there was a couple of people who are a bit, well, when's the Men's Recognition Awards, that kind of thing, the usual. And part of me thought, well, yes, this is important, we need to stick with this, and obviously we have stuck with it. But one of the things that we were very aware of from the beginning was that you can't really consider these things in a vacuum. So a company that is doing very well on something like gender equity and inclusion, and I'll look at L&C here, our headline partners, we've worked with them for a few years now, you're doing a great job as a business on that specifically, but they're obviously clearly thinking about inclusion as a whole, and discrimination as a whole, and looking more broadly at all the different sort of intersectional forms of inclusion. So we were very conscious of that even from the early days of the Women's Recognition Awards. And after a couple of years, we added a few more categories and then a few more categories again. So we have sort of a section now of extra categories that are more broadly equity, diversity and inclusion categories to represent the fact that, like I say, these things don't exist in a vacuum. They do work as a whole, and that businesses succeeding on looking at one of those issues is probably looking across the board at all of them, and that those things are tied together. And I think that's a really useful way to kind of signal to people who want to get involved in this, is that these are all internet connected issues that you talk about. And actually, when you read all the entries in those categories, it's very clear that businesses are trying to sort of, like you say, move the dial across the board on issues relating to all different types of groups of people in the industry, and that sort of lets those shine a little bit more and sort of showcase what they do. And in terms of what we do in future, we're going to continue to keep supporting those, obviously, and potentially broaden out those categories and looking at those more broadly. We boxed ourselves into corner a little bit with the name Women's Recognition Awards, but I think that's okay. I think it's clear that there's a huge amount of support for the awards, and it's continued to grow each year. And I hit a point where I thought, I wonder if we'll hit a sort of natural point where 5 years on from the Women in Finance Charter, for example, will people sort of get bored of it? It's not the issue of the day anymore. And actually, that just hasn't happened. It keeps growing. This year, we think we did 35% more applications and nominations. That's 35% more people who are really keen to get involved in this. And that's not just in the awards specifically for women, that's in the equity, diversity and inclusion categories as well. So I think it really speaks to the fact that people aren't bored of this. Perhaps how people engage with it changes and shifts a little bit. And I think the stuff that DIFF are doing on the event inclusion stuff is really interesting and really important. To go back to that idea of role models, it's really important to be making sure that, yes, there are women speaking on things, but like you say, Will, there are plenty of women who are role models in the industry. How do you kind of broaden that out? And I think, you know, one of our focuses over the next few years with making sure that we kind of embed that in the things that we do with the Women Recognition Awards, with the categories, and looking at the businesses that are, and the people that are kind of pushing that in the industry as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I think things like this are really important because there are lots of people and businesses and initiatives having really good conversations across the industry. And I think bringing those together and working more sort of collectively is going to be really important, so that everyone sort of combines knowledge and shares information. And for us as a business personally as well, we're going to be looking a lot at smaller firms, because I think conversations like this are great. I can see some of the names in the comments. There's some very, like, you know, big names in here, big businesses. How do we keep those conversations going with the likes of our readers who are small businesses? How do we encourage people who work in tiny 3 or 4 people offices to have these conversations about equality when you don't have a giant HR department or loads of policy? So I think that's going to be the focus, you know, going forward as we look at sort of equity and diversity more broadly, and that will be brought into what we do with the Women's Recognition Awards as well.
Thank you. And look, I just want to say thank you to Iain, Amy and Rachel for your time today, personally for your support, that everything that you've given me, and certainly the allyship that you've offered to what we're doing. So thank you again. Look, a couple of closing remarks from me before I pass back to Nicola. Pride began as a riot. It grew into a movement, and today it is a celebration and a call to continue the action that we need. Right now, there's a new series on Channel 4 by Russell T Davies, Tiptoe. Never a more apt name about, I think, where we face challenges right now. It's a show that strips away some of the rhetoric that we normally see, and it does deliver an urgent warning about the current social landscape in this country. There has been massive progress, and there has been massive positive endeavours that have been achieved, but it's never been more at risk when right now, across even where I live here in Essex, libraries are banned from showcasing Pride events. Flags are being taken down during Pride Month because they don't inspire, in some people's view, the sense of openness and togetherness, and they're against British values. So the tiptoeing effect of going backwards is a real risk for people across this country that are LGBT, and it takes all of us to recognise that. So if you haven't yet, I'd encourage you to watch it. But it's a reminder that progress is never inevitable. It is fought for, we march against it, and visibility does save lives. When young LGBT people see thousands of people celebrating who they are, and it can move them away from despair and give them real hope in terms of where this country can be and where our community can be. And for me, it's a reminder of something so very beautifully simple, but profoundly radical, that every single person deserves to live their life openly, safely, and with pride. That's what 2,000 people marched for in 1972 in London, and that's what Pride stands for today. So to everyone who took 45 minutes out of their day and their lunch to hear slightly more about Pride, the Pride and Finance Alliance, and what this industry can do together, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Will, and also Iain, Amy and Rachel as well. Absolutely. I feel like we could talk about this for hours. I wish we had more time, actually, because it is such a broad topic. for me, I think there's probably a few things there that really resonated and that I think we all should consider. The first one is that we need to be more open to discussions. The second one being the importance of allyship. And I think the biggest one for me is a phrase that we'll use: progress comes when we all keep going in the same direction. And I think, that is really, really important. So thank you for bringing all of that today, and for your really open, honest and candid thoughts. Please do share the recording when it becomes available with your teams. Just to quickly signpost as well, the next session, which is going to be on the 20th of July, session will be covering mental resilience in high pressure roles. So please do join us for that. There will be a full calendar of lunch and learns for the next 12 months appearing on the Working in Mortgages website in the next couple of weeks. So please keep an eye out for that as well. And going forward, all lunch and learn sessions will be on the third Monday of the month. So they will be on consistent dates to help you to plan with your diaries to be able to join us a bit more often as well. So we've listened to the feedback and we're trying to make that a bit easier to make it more accessible for everybody. So on that note, I'll just close off to say again, thank you so much everybody that joined us today, and also again massive thanks to Will, Rachel, Iain and Amy, and have a great day everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really interesting.
Thanks. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Sabrina, you okay to stop the recording now, please? Thanks.